From SwissWatchExpo, spotlight on the many firsts in the history of Rolex. First in watchmaking that Rolex introduced. Rolex has long established itself as a leader in watchmaking. Ask just about anyone of their top-of-mind watch brand, and the answer is sure to be Rolex. Rolex is where it is now because it led the way for many innovations and milestones in the history of watchmaking. In 1910, the company earned a chronometer certification, the first ever to be given to a wristwatch, and they have not stopped since. How many of today's most common watch features were actually introduced by Rolex? Stay tuned to find out! Let's start with the Oyster. Launched in 1926, the Rolex Oyster was the world's first truly waterproof and dustproof watch. To protect the dial and movement from elements, the Oyster was developed with a hermetically sealed case, closed by a screw-down crown and a screw-down case back, each lined with rubber gaskets. The following year, Rolex founder Hans Willdorf famously gave swimmer Mercedes Glides one of the earliest Rolex Oysters to wear in her attempt to repeat her swim across the English Channel. After 10 hours in icy cold water, her Rolex was still dry inside. It was a feat that provided the way for water-resistant and diving watches of the future. Enjoying this video so far? Subscribe to our channel and get updates on new videos. Rolex's Oyster Perpetual movement, rated in 1931, was the first self-winding mechanism with a perpetual rotor. Ever wondered why it's called Perpetual? Instead of being manually wound, the Oyster Perpetual movement has the ability to run on the energy provided by the motion of the wearer's wrist. The activity of the wearer causes the rotor to move back and forth, thus winding the mainspring and powering the watch. It was because of this advancement that we have automatic watches today. Did you know the ever-popular Rolex DATEJUST was the first watch with a date window on the dial? As simple as it can be today, the quick changing date on the dial was a game changer during its time. Rolex was celebrating their 40th anniversary in 1945, so they wanted to commemorate the occasion with a groundbreaking timepiece. The result was the DATEJUST, the first self-winding, water-resistant wristwatch with a date window at 3 o'clock. Aside from displaying the date on the dial, it automatically changes at midnight, without the need for adjustment. At long last, the date will always be just. Rolex has long made watches for professionals, and that includes explorers. Rolex wanted to test the robustness of their watches by exposing them to elements, and in 1969, a Rolex became the first watch to reach the peak of Mount Everest. In 1953, Sir Edmund Hillary became the first man to reach the summit of Mount Everest, along with expedition partner Tenzing Norgay. On his wrist was a Rolex watch, an Oyster Perpetual that would end up being the ancestor of what is now known as the Rolex Explorer. With the goal of creating watches that can withstand elements, Rolex started sending their Oyster Perpetuals to Himalaya expeditions. The pre-Explorer eventually accompanied Norgay and Hillary to the peak. To commemorate the feat, Rolex released the Oyster Perpetual Explorer that same year. The Explorer story continues until today, as the line of robust watches for exploration and everyday wear. The Rolex Submariner is not only the world's most recognizable timepiece, it was also the first watch that was waterproof to 100 meters or 330 feet, and equipped with a rotatable bezel for divers to read time underwater. Rolex already had water-resistant watches since the late 1920s, after they launched the innovative waterproof Oyster case. But René Pijonnery, a passionate diver and one of Rolex's directors, thought it was time for a dedicated watch for diving. Through Jonnery's insight, the Submariner was launched with the distinct honor of being the first water-resistant dive watch, one that was waterproof up to 100 meters. And not only that, John Ray's idea was for the Submariner to be a diving watch that could also be used as a dress watch. The Submariner, of course, became one of the most successful Rolex models in history, and one that set the benchmark for all other dive watches. Rolex's flagship watch, the Rolex President Day Date, is also the first watch to display the day and date of the week on the dial. While Rolex produced complicated watches before, such as moon phase and perpetual calendars, they didn't sell particularly well. The Rolex Day Date was the first complicated watch that resonated with the public. It inserted its universal nature by becoming the first waterproof and self-winding chronometer to indicate, in full, the day of the week in 26 different languages. It also went on to become the choice timepiece of diplomats and world leaders, including many US presidents. Today, the Rolex President Day Date is seen as a symbol of success. Rolex bezels have progressed in functionality through the decades, from 24-hour markers to bidirectional bezels. In 2007, they introduced the first wristwatch to have a command bezel, designed for multiple uses, the Rolex Yachtmaster 2. Rolex introduced the innovative ring command bezels with the Yachtmaster 2's debut. This time, the ring command does double duty and acts as a timing bezel for setting the countdown timer, thus having time-setting functions similar to what a winding crown would. Rolex bezels have progressed in functionality through the decades, from 24-hour markers to bidirectional bezels. While it may look complicated, the ring command bezel has introduced the easiest way to set the functions of a sophisticated watch. And finally, we have one of Rolex's most recent innovations, the first bicolor ceramic bezel watch, the Rolex GMT Master 2 Batman, released in 2013. Its story actually begins in 2005, when Rolex introduced the Cerachrome ceramic bezel in their professional watches. Made from extremely hard ceramic material, it is virtually scratch-proof and fade-proof. Some watches from GMT Master line were left out from using the Cerachrome due to their bicolored bezels that were thought to be impossible to create using ceramic. In 2013, Rolex achieved what was thought of as impossible, to create a ceramic bezel with two colors, but produced as a single piece. Rolex begins to create the bezel as one color, and then adding the other color before the bezel hardens. The result is a bicolor, single ceramic ring, with no bleeding of color and gradual fading. In true Rolex fashion, they are the only brand in the world to do this patent process. Rolex is the brand it is today because of its forward thinking and innovation. We're excited to see what their next innovation will bring. Which watch was your favorite? Tell us in the comments section. Want to learn more about watches? Click on the upper right screen for our Watch Guides playlist. Don't miss out! We launch 2 videos weekly on the best and the latest in watches. To get updates, subscribe to our YouTube channel.